Let's turn to the Word of God. Let's open our Bibles, and if you've got one of those black pew Bibles in front of you this morning, I'm going to direct you to page 860. The words will also be up on the screen as well. This is one of the most beautiful Easter accounts I think that we read. It's so powerful, I think, because it's a journey. It's a journey, and they are transformed. As T.S. Lewis reminds us, we're always transformed when we return and we find the place where we began, transformed and changed again. So let's read, beginning in verse 13, about the walk to Emmaus. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. By the way, this is Easter afternoon. As the sun is setting and they're walking towards the sunset, Jesus himself comes near. And he says to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and the rulers handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish," or how slow to understand, Jesus says, "and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Wasn't it necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory? And then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself and all the scriptures." Had to be one of the great Bible studies ever given. As they came near the village to which they were going, the stranger walked ahead, as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it's almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them, and when he was at the table with them, he took bread. He blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had made known to them in the breaking of the bread. Lord, we thank you for this word. Thank you, Lord, again for the opportunity to draw near to you. We thank you that you've already drawn near to us. Speak to us afresh in this time as we contemplate and reflect on the scriptures. And by your Holy Spirit, do that work that I can't do, that none of us can do in our own strength, but by your grace, do the transforming work in our hearts today. In Jesus' name, amen. So some of us know that there was a group that went to the Holy Land back in 2018, before the pandemic, yes. And what a beautiful time that was. And one of the last things, or perhaps the last thing we did, if I read my notes correctly, was we went to Emmaus Nicopolis, which is an is a traditional site known as the original Emmaus. I have to confess there's more than one possible Emmaus, but this one has as good a shot as any of them, and for several reasons, which I won't go into. But we celebrated communion in this spot outside of Jerusalem, and I noticed a beautiful icon on the wall, which represents the Emmaus walk and this moment of revelation when Jesus breaks the bread, and we're told they recognized him. And they recognized him. Above the icon is that quotation in Greek, kai epignoson auton, and they recognized him. They recognized him. Now, the Greek word for knowledge, and I'm sorry, but I do enjoy and love ancient languages. Not because I'm trying to show off, but because I really think it's cool and beautiful. And there's a beautiful word for gnosis, which means knowledge, and epignosis is like an amplification of that word. So you put that word epi in front of it, and it means face-to-face knowledge, knowledge by experience, a deep knowledge. And what we read in the gospel is, yes, they had knowledge about Jesus, but in this moment they had epignosis. They had this deep face-to-face encounter with Jesus by experience. Luke says that at the table they recognized him, and that's important. But before they recognized him, Luke very much wants us to know that Jesus recognized them. And that's the good news that I want to unpack this morning, that Jesus recognized them. And I want to talk a little bit about what that means. First of all, that Jesus recognized their broken hearts. Jesus recognized their broken hearts. The two disciples of Jesus who walked the 7-mile road from Jerusalem to Emmaus were talking about all these things that had happened. And we know that when the stranger approaches them, and I love the image here of Jesus. Have you ever been on a walk or a hike, and you've had somebody behind you, and they're slowly kind of gaining on you? And eventually, there's that moment where they either pass you by, or something unusual happens, and they actually sort of sync up with you, and you begin to walk together. Well, that's what happened. The stranger syncs up with these two as they're walking along, and he begins to ask questions. What have you been talking about? And we're told by Luke that they stood still, looking sad. They stopped walking. And when you're on a hike, whatever can stop you from hiking, from walking, has got to be pretty important. And they stopped in the middle of their journey, looking sad. And they're shocked that this stranger doesn't know about the events that have just taken place in Jerusalem. Everybody knew about these things. Even the ancient historian Josephus talks about the fact that Jesus died. This was a big deal. Everybody recognized that his death was a major event. So they explained to the stranger that Jesus, this prophet, mighty in word and deed, was handed over. And we know what that involved. It meant the desertion of his own followers, his disciples who deserted him, the religious authorities who handed him over, the Roman imperial powers that actually crucified him. And all of that happened. And the disciples are holding all of this together. And they explained to Jesus, they had hoped that he was the one. They had hoped that he was the Mashiach, the deliverer, the one who would save them and restore Israel to its true power again. And the stranger asks him, not because he doesn't know the answer to their question, but because he does know. He sees their grief. He sees their sadness. He knows, and we know the irony of this entire story, he knows exactly what happened to Jesus. He knows epignosis, up close, personal, by experience. The abandonment, the betrayal, the pain. Painfully, personally, intimately, he recognizes their grief because he himself had experienced even an infinitely deeper grief and pain. And he wants them to talk about it. That's what I think is beautiful. He draws near to them in their pain, and he says, he gives them an opportunity to give voice to it, to speak about it, to share about it with him, without the knowledge of who he is. Raw, yeah? Unfiltered. And I want to say the road on which the brokenhearted walk, we know, is not traveled alone. And I'm sure I've made this point many times. It's not a rabbit trail. It's a superhighway, right? It's a major highway. All of God's people, and in fact, not just God's people, let's face it, all human beings walk this road. And they experience at some point great grief and sadness. That's part of what it means to be human. So right away, I think it's comforting, honestly, to know that we're in good company, right? When we're walking down this road, we're in great company, you know? And we can look at the scriptures as just a beautiful tapestry that tells a story of God's redemptive work in and through the hurt and the suffering that we sometimes experience. From Moses, who waited for God's deliverance for 40 years, to Mary. Which Mary? I mean, Mary Magdalene, or Mary, the mother of Jesus, or Mary of Cleopas, those who were standing right there by the cross and feeling that loneliness and that grief. You know, the Surgeon General was talking just this week, if you didn't get my email, about loneliness. I just love this. And I found out later, it wasn't just an announcement, it was a whole book. I mean, he wrote a whole book about it. The reality that we are living right now in an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. And I think part of that is because of COVID-19, but I think probably it's been going on before that. I think COVID-19 was just an epi, you know, it was an amplification of what was already going on. And we know there are many factors that contribute to that loneliness and isolation. Certainly we can choose it, but also we know technology has served to often distance us from each other, and much of our communication is mediated through machines and through technology. And it is not epignosis, it's not face-to-face, it's not in person. And hey, I use Zoom all the time, right? We have it for meetings, it's great. But it's still a mediated experience, and there's a place for it. But there's a fact out there, and that is that a lot of us, I have friends who have literally not walked outside their apartment, basically, for 3 years since COVID-19. I know people who have been that isolated. And maybe I'm talking to some of you who are on the screen right now. That's tough, and for all the different reasons that's taken place. I know children, I know young people who have been incredibly affected and feel deeply isolated and have been affected mentally, psychologically, physically. There's nothing like being recognized. There's nothing like being seen and noticed and heard and loved and cherished. That's just something we need as human beings. Every single one of us. We all need that. And Jesus knew it, and he came alongside these two disciples in their grief. And he was already doing his healing work before they knew him. But secondly, Jesus recognized something else about them, and he recognized their doubting hearts. He recognized their questions. Not in an accusatory way, I believe. I really don't believe it was an accusatory although some of the translations in our scriptures would lead you to believe that, but I believe it was in an empathic way. As the two disciples explained to the stranger about all that's happened over the past weekend, they reveal in Luke's account that they had their doubts. They had their doubts about the women. We've been doing a whole series on the women of the Bible. I'm sorry it kind of came to an end. But here they are again. We're talking about them because it was the women who first come to the empty tomb. And it's the women who first declare that Jesus is alive. And the guys had their doubts. We went, or some of us anyway, we dispatched a few of us to go to the empty tomb, and we found it just like the women said, but the text is very emphatic, but him we did not see. Him we did not see. And you do get the sense as you read that they're like, yeah, right. And you can hear the skepticism in their voices. But at this point, the stranger responds and either says, you are fools. You know how foolish you are. And it's possible Jesus said it that way. Maybe he did. But that word, anaetos, also means you are slow to understand. You know, it's like, hey, I'm walking with you. I'm hearing this story. I've heard of, maybe I have heard about Jesus, but I think you're slow to understand what the scriptures say. This sounds like something that could have happened. How slow to understand you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets, including the women, have declared to you. And then he goes on to show from the scriptures that the Messiah had to suffer before entering his glory, which was contrary to the common belief about the Messiah's mission. He came to conquer. He came to be triumphant. He did not come. Messiah was not coming to suffer and was certainly not coming to be put on a cross. That's crazy. And perhaps he had to remind them on that Passover weekend. Remember, this is Passover weekend. Remember the lamb that was slain. Remember the lamb's blood that was put on the door of every house in Egypt of the Israelites. And the mystery of what that meant. Somehow there was something redemptive. There was a sign there of God's redemptive work in the blood of that lamb. Or maybe the words of Isaiah, who speaks of the suffering servant who would bear with us and for us our pain, our sin, our suffering. Or that valley of dry bones in Ezekiel. That valley of dry bones, the people of God raised up to new life. What was that all about? These two disciples had hoped, like all of us, right, that suffering and sacrifice would be avoided. You know, I would be one of those human beings that never has to suffer, never has to feel pain, never has to go through trials and tears. And of course, they preferred the idea of God's victory without sacrifice. But wouldn't that be a very strange Savior who came to save, but without experiencing any of the pain, any of the suffering, any of the trials of those he came to save? Luke says that they knew the stranger spoke truth. They wanted to know more, and so they invited him in for dinner. Why don't you stay as we pass by Emmaus now? Let's talk a little further. And that's where Jesus recognizes their burning hearts. Luke informs us that as they come near the village to which they're going, Jesus walks ahead as if he were going on. But notice Jesus does not invite himself. He doesn't invite himself. He waits for their invitation. He waits for them to invite him. And isn't it strange that our hearts can burn with this desire for God, but that we can still say no, really. We still have the power to say no. God gives us the power to say no because of shame or guilt or fear. You know, we have this power to say no. And so in the mystery of that, Jesus waits for their invitation. But here's the miracle. The power of God gives us the ability, the freedom, not only to say no, but the power also to say yes. Come. Come, Lord. Come and spend some time with us. We want to know you more. And we have the grace to say, God, I don't even know if you're there. I don't even know if you're there, but can I do a little experiment of faith with you? Can I just assume that you are there for today and see what happens? Let's talk. And Jesus recognizes something has changed. There's a rekindled flame. We find that out later. Something has already been stirring in the disciples, a burning, a fire that begins to ignite inside their hearts. There's a fire of hope that begins to rekindle simply from hearing the word, the scripture, and the Spirit speaking to them, God speaking to them through it. So a meal is quickly prepared, and the one who's invited to join them, suddenly he becomes the host. And we're told that he breaks bread, and he gives it to them. And then, kai epignoson auton, and they recognized him. They recognized him. They recognized him. Those hands, they had seen those hands before. They had seen them, but they were different. Different from the hands that divided a few fish and loaves of bread and fed 5,000 people. Different from the hands that divided the bread and shared them at the Last Supper. These were the nail-scarred hands of the one who was crucified on a cross, but now healed. And they recognized him. Epignosis, face to face, by experience. It's you. And together they reflect on the presence of Jesus. Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road? While he was opening the scriptures to us? And we might add, in the breaking of the bread. And they lost no time in returning to Jerusalem to tell the others of their experience of the risen Christ. And what a beautiful moment. They don't even have time to get their story out. They're already told, yes, he has indeed risen, and he's appeared to Peter. And that's good news for all of us because Peter really messed up, and that means we're forgiven. So there's some grace. So I want to say, friends, this is the day to recognize the one who first recognized us. This is the day to recognize the one who understands, deeply understands, by experience, our grief, our sadness, our sorrow, who deeply understands our doubts, our questions, and desires for us to recognize him, to know him. Paul once said, "Now I know in part, then I will know fully," epignosis, face to face, really, even as I am fully known. He already fully knows us. The Lord wants us to come to him now and to receive his love, his presence, his power once again. In this place in which, by God's intention, we are meant to know one another deeply, face to face, and to experience his love through the body of Christ. Let's think about that in this moment of silent prayer. Amen. Friends, this is the joyful feast of the people of God. And people will come from north and south and from east and west, Jesus said. I guarantee it. To sit at table in the kingdom of God. We'll be surprised at all the folks we see at that table. Most of all, they'll be surprised that we're there too. But we're here because of the grace of God. Because of the grace of God. And so we come to this table right now knowing that the Lord intends for us to recognize Him in the breaking of the bread, in the sharing of the cup with one another, in the beauty of the fellowship of the body of Christ and His people. And so let's pray together this prayer. Living God, by your own power you raised Yeshua, Jesus, from death to life. Through His victory over the grave, we are set free from the bonds of sin and the fear of death to share the glorious freedom of the children